They called me the dramatic one, always making a fuss about nothing. But that day when my husband placed those divorce papers in my hand and said, "Sign these," he had no idea what I was about to reveal. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the granite countertops I had paid for, in the house that bore my name on the deed, while my daughter sat at the breakfast table, still wearing yesterday's disappointment like a heavy coat. The Christmas wrapping paper from his family's gathering lay crumpled in the corner, a reminder of another holiday where every child received gifts except mine. My husband stood there in his pressed shirt, the one I had bought him for his promotion, confident in his assumption that I would simply sign away my rights and fade quietly into the background as I always had. But something had shifted in me during those long winter months, something that had been building like pressure behind a dam, ready to burst forth and change everything. Before I share what really happened that day, I want to know you're here with me. Just say listening in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reaches. The pattern had been so subtle at first, so carefully orchestrated that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. Christmas morning at my mother-in-law's house had become a ritual of exclusion, wrapped in the pretty paper of family tradition. My daughter Emma would sit cross-legged on the Persian rug, her eyes bright with anticipation as gift after gift was distributed to her cousins, her half-siblings from my husband's first marriage, even the neighbor children who happened to be visiting. The pile of presents around her remained consistently, painfully small, while mountains of boxes grew around every other child in the room. When I would gently mention the disparity, my husband would wave it away with practiced dismissal, telling me that his family simply had different gift-giving traditions, that Emma was too young to notice, that I was being too sensitive about material things. But Emma did notice, and I watched her learn to shrink herself smaller and smaller at each gathering, her bright personality dimming like a light on a failing battery. She would press herself against my side during present time, her small fingers gripping my hand as she watched her cousins tear through package after package of toys and clothes and books. The other children would squeal with delight, holding up their new treasures for everyone to admire, while Emma would quietly play with whatever single small item she had received, usually something clearly picked up as an afterthought from the drugstore checkout line. A pack of dollar store crayons while her cousin got a full art set. A small stuffed animal while her half-sister unwrapped the dollhouse complete with furniture and tiny family figures. My sister-in-law Sarah would orchestrate these gatherings with military precision, her own children always receiving the most elaborate gifts, their names called first for every surprise. She would catch my eye over the chaos of wrapping paper and bow her head in false sympathy, as if the oversight was some tragic accident rather than calculated cruelty. The other adults would exchange knowing glances when they thought I wasn't looking, their expressions suggesting that Emma's treatment was somehow deserved, that perhaps if I had been a better wife, a more valuable family member, my daughter would be worth their investment. My husband's passivity in these moments cut deeper than any outright hostility could have. He would busy himself with his phone or engage in loud conversation with his brother, suddenly deaf to the emotional dynamics playing out in front of him. When I would try to discuss it later, he would accuse me of stirring up drama, of being ungrateful for his family's generosity, of teaching Emma to be entitled and demanding. He would remind me that his family had welcomed me despite my modest background, that I should be thankful for their inclusion rather than nitpicking about gift distribution. The gaslighting was so consistent, so methodical, that I began to question my own perceptions, wondering if maybe I was the problem, if maybe I was seeing slights where none existed. But the evidence was undeniable when I started paying closer attention. Family photos from these gatherings would show Emma sitting slightly apart from the other children, her arms empty while they clutched their new toys. Birthday parties followed the same pattern, with Emma receiving token gifts while elaborate celebrations were planned for her cousins. School events became another stage for the same drama, with my in-laws making grand gestures of support for their other grandchildren while Emma's achievements went unnoticed and unremarked upon. When she made honor roll, the news was met with polite nods and quick subject changes. When her cousin got a B on a spelling test, it was cause for celebration and special dinner reservations. The emotional toll on Emma was becoming harder to ignore with each passing month. She stopped asking about family gatherings, stopped getting excited about holidays, stopped mentioning her cousin's accomplishments or new possessions. Her teacher called me in for a conference, concerned about Emma's withdrawal in class, her reluctance to participate in group activities, her habit of apologizing for things that weren't her fault. The bright, confident little girl who had once burst through our front door with stories and laughter was becoming a shadow of herself, and I was watching it happen in real time while feeling powerless to stop it. My role in this family dynamic had crystallized into something I barely recognized. I had become the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over awkward moments and made excuses for others' behavior. When Emma would ask why she received fewer gifts, I would craft explanations about different families showing love in different ways. When she would wonder why her cousins got invited to special outings while she stayed home, I would distract her with activities and treats, trying to fill the void left by their rejection. I was complicit in my own daughter's diminishment, teaching her to accept less, to expect less, to be grateful for crumbs while others feasted. The financial irony of the situation was a secret I carried alone, a truth that would have shattered their carefully constructed narrative of superiority. While they treated me like a charity case, someone who should be grateful for their scraps of attention, I was quietly building an empire they couldn't imagine. The business I had started from our spare bedroom had grown into something substantial, something that generated more income than my husband's salary, something that funded the very lifestyle they used to position themselves above me. Every family dinner they hosted, every elaborate vacation they took, every designer item they flaunted was made possible by money that flowed through accounts they didn't even know existed. My investment portfolio had grown steadily over the years, built through careful research and strategic decisions they dismissed as my little hobby. The real estate properties I had acquired were generating passive income that exceeded what most people made in their primary careers. The business relationships I had cultivated were with people who valued my expertise and trusted my judgment, people who saw me as a leader rather than a convenient doormat. But I had kept this success hidden, partly from habit and partly from a growing understanding that knowledge was power, and power was something I might need to protect my daughter and myself. The technology consulting firm I had built specialized in helping small businesses optimize their operations, and my client list had grown to include some of the most successful companies in our region. The irony wasn't lost on me that these successful business owners sought my advice and paid premium rates for my insights, while my own family treated me like someone who couldn't balance a checkbook. I had developed systems and strategies that had saved companies hundreds of thousands of dollars, had prevented costly mistakes, and identified profitable opportunities that others had missed. My reputation in the industry was solid, my referrals constant, my income climbing steadily year after year. But what they really didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for longer than I cared to admit. The separate bank accounts, the investment portfolios, the business assets, the real estate holdings, all of it was positioned to protect Emma and give us the freedom to choose our own path. I had been building an exit strategy while they assumed I was trapped, dependent on their grudging acceptance and my husband's modest income. The house we lived in, the cars we drove, the lifestyle we maintained was all funded by my success, but I had structured everything carefully, legally, strategically. Emma's trust fund was already established, her college education secured, her future protected in ways that would ensure she never had to accept less than she deserved. The investment accounts I had set up would provide her with opportunities and choices that no one could take away from her. I had been planning for her independence while they were busy teaching her to be grateful for neglect. The scholarship fund I had quietly established would eventually help other children who found themselves in similar situations, children whose worth wasn't recognized by the adults who should have been protecting them. The catalyst for everything that followed started with Emma's 8th birthday party. I had planned a small celebration at home, nothing elaborate, just cake and a few friends from school. But my mother-in-law had insisted on hosting something at her house, claiming she wanted to make it special for Emma. I should have known better, should have trusted my instincts, but I was still clinging to the hope that they might finally see Emma the way I did, might finally recognize her value and treat her accordingly. The party was scheduled for the same day as her cousin Madison's dance recital, and I watched the family's priorities reveal themselves with crystalline clarity. Emma's party was relegated to the afternoon, a hurried affair squeezed between the morning recital preparations and the evening celebration dinner for Madison. The decorations were minimal, clearly purchased at the last minute, while Madison's recital preparations had been planned for weeks. The cake was a simple grocery store sheet cake with Emma's name spelled wrong, while Madison's post-recital celebration featured a custom-designed confection from the most expensive bakery in town. The guest list for Emma's party included only a few of her school friends and the immediate family, while Madison's celebration included extended family friends, and what seemed like half the neighborhood. But it was the gift situation that finally broke something inside me. Emma received presents at her own birthday party, small tokens that looked like they had been grabbed from a clearance bin, while Madison received a pile of congratulatory gifts for her recital that dwarfed anything Emma had ever seen. The adults spent the entire party discussing Madison's performance, her costume, her potential, her bright future in dance, while Emma sat quietly in the corner with her dollar store coloring book and broken crayons. When I tried to redirect some attention to the birthday girl, I was met with polite but dismissive smiles and quick returns to the Madison Appreciation Hour. The breaking point came when Emma, trying to join the conversation about Madison's recital, mentioned that she had been practicing piano and had learned a new song. The room fell silent for a moment, and then my sister-in-law Sarah laughed and said that everyone was a little musician at Emma's age, that Madison's dance was special because it took real talent and dedication. The dismissal was so casual, so automatic, that I realized this wasn't just favoritism or oversight. This was systematic devaluation, a consistent message that Emma's interests, achievements, and very existence were less important than those of her cousins. That night, after we returned home and Emma had gone to bed, I sat in my home office looking at the financial statements that told the real story of our family's situation. The numbers on the screen represented years of careful planning, strategic thinking, and business acumen that none of them suspected I possessed. I had built something substantial while they were busy treating me like a charity case, had created security and options while they assumed I was trapped in grateful dependence. The contrast between their perception and reality was so stark that I almost laughed. But the pain of watching Emma's spirit being crushed had moved far beyond humor. The phone call started the next morning. My business partner needed my input on a major contract negotiation. My property manager had questions about the latest acquisition. My financial advisor wanted to discuss the quarterly performance of my investment portfolio. My accountant needed approval for several tax strategies that would save me significant money in the coming year. In the space of 2 hours, I handled decisions involving hundreds of thousands of dollars, provided strategic guidance that would impact multiple businesses, and managed assets that most people could only dream of controlling. Then my husband called to remind me to pick up his dry cleaning and asked if I could cook something special for dinner because his mother was coming over. The cognitive dissonance was becoming impossible to ignore. During the day, I was a respected business owner, a sought-after consultant, a successful investor, and a strategic thinker. In the evening, I was treated like hired help, expected to be grateful for inclusion in family activities where my daughter was systematically excluded and devalued. The professional respect I commanded in my business life stood in stark contrast to the dismissal I experienced in my personal life. People paid premium rates for my advice and expertise, while my own family treated my opinions as inconvenient noise. Emma's school conference provided another window into the disconnect between perception and reality. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, pulled me aside after the formal meeting to discuss Emma's exceptional abilities and her concerns about Emma's increasing withdrawal. She showed me samples of Emma's work, tests that demonstrated advanced reasoning skills, creative projects that showed remarkable insight and talent. Emma was testing at levels significantly above her grade, showing particular strength in mathematics and logical problem-solving. But more concerning was Emma's reluctance to showcase these abilities, her tendency to hide her intelligence rather than celebrate it. Mrs. Rodriguez had noticed that Emma would often give wrong answers on purpose, would dumb down her contributions to group discussions, would avoid opportunities to demonstrate her capabilities. When pressed, Emma had confided that being too smart made people uncomfortable, that it was better to be quiet and not show off. The teacher's concerns about Emma's self-concept and her deliberate underperformance hit me like a physical blow. My brilliant daughter was learning to hide her light rather than risk the disapproval of adults who should have been nurturing her gifts. The conversation with Mrs. Rodriguez also revealed that Emma had been asking questions about family dynamics, wondering why some children seemed to matter more than others, why some kids got attention for small achievements while others were ignored for significant ones. The teacher had been trying to reassure Emma about her worth, but she could see that the child was struggling with concepts of fairness and value that were far too complex for her age. The damage being done to Emma's self-esteem was becoming visible to outsiders, and I realized that my attempts to shield her from the family's dysfunction were failing. That evening, I found Emma in her room, quietly working on a math worksheet that was clearly several grade levels above her assigned homework. When I asked her about it, she shrugged and said she had found it online and thought it looked interesting. She had solved complex problems that would challenge high school students, had worked through mathematical concepts that most adults couldn't grasp, and had done it all in her spare time simply because she enjoyed the challenge. But when I praised her work, she quickly put it away and asked if I thought it made her weird, if I thought other people would be annoyed that she was working on hard problems. The fear in her voice, the assumption that her intelligence was something to be hidden rather than celebrated, crystallized everything I had been feeling about our family situation. Emma was learning to make herself smaller, to dim her brightness, to apologize for her gifts because the adults around her had taught her that her value was conditional and limited. She was developing the same people-pleasing tendencies that had trapped me, the same desperate need for approval that had kept me silent about my own achievements and capabilities. The final catalyst came during the family's annual Christmas gathering, the event that had become my personal symbol of everything wrong with our family dynamic. The scene was set like a theatrical production designed to highlight the hierarchy of worth within the family structure. The presents were arranged under the tree in careful piles, each child's gifts displayed like a visual representation of their value to the family. Emma's small pile sat in the shadow of towering gift mountains belonging to her cousins, the disparity so obvious that even family friends began to notice and comment. This year, though, something had changed in me. I found myself watching the proceedings with the detached clarity of someone who had already made her decision, someone who was simply gathering final evidence for a case that had already been decided. I watched Emma's face as gift after gift was distributed to other children, watched her carefully compose her expression into grateful acceptance, watched her learn to swallow disappointment and pretend it was satisfaction. I watched my husband busy himself with his phone, watched him find excuses to leave the room whenever the favoritism became too obvious to ignore. But I also watched something else, something that filled me with quiet pride and determination. I watched Emma help her younger cousin open a particularly difficult package, watched her share her own meager gifts without being asked, watched her congratulate each child on their presents with genuine happiness despite her own disappointment. I watched my daughter demonstrate grace and generosity that the adults around her had failed to model, watched her rise above the petty cruelties being inflicted on her, watched her maintain her dignity and kindness in the face of systematic rejection. That night, after Emma had gone to bed clutching the single small gift she had received, I sat in my home office and made the phone call that would change everything. My attorney, a sharp and successful woman who had helped me structure my business assets, listened quietly as I outlined the situation and my intentions. She asked pointed questions about documentation, about asset protection, about my long-term goals for Emma's security and education. By the end of the conversation, We had scheduled a meeting to begin the formal process of protecting my daughter's future and securing our independence. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my family was busy treating me like someone who should be grateful for their scraps, I was consulting with one of the most expensive attorneys in the city, someone who charged more per hour than most people made in a week. My business success had given me access to resources and expertise that would have shocked them, had opened doors and created opportunities that existed far beyond their narrow vision of what my life should look like. I had built something substantial while they were busy diminishing me, had created options while they assumed I was trapped. Over the following weeks, I found myself observing my family dynamics with new eyes, documenting patterns and behaviors that would soon become relevant in legal proceedings. I watched my husband's casual dismissal of Emma's achievements, his automatic deference to his family's judgment, his comfortable assumption that I would continue to absorb their disrespect indefinitely. I watched my in-laws' careful orchestration of exclusion, their subtle but consistent messaging that Emma was somehow less deserving than her cousins, their treatment of me as a convenient scapegoat for their own insecurities and failures. But I also watched Emma's resilience, her quiet determination to keep trying despite repeated disappointments, her refusal to become bitter or cruel despite the example being set around her. I watched her develop survival strategies that broke my heart, her careful management of her own expectations, her protective numbness in situations that should have been celebrations. I watched my daughter learn to be strong in ways that no child should have to be strong, and I realized that my job as her mother was to make sure she never had to accept less than she deserved ever again. The morning when everything changed started like any other morning, with my husband getting ready for work and Emma preparing for school. But something was different in the air, a tension that had been building for months finally reaching its breaking point. My phone had been buzzing with messages. From my business partner about a major contract we had just secured, messages about the success we had achieved and the expansion opportunities it would create. My investment portfolio had just reached a milestone that represented years of careful planning and strategic thinking. My real estate holdings were generating returns that exceeded my most optimistic projections. And then my husband walked into the kitchen, placed a manila envelope on the counter, and said the words that would finally set everything in motion. The divorce papers landed on the granite countertop with a soft whisper that seemed to echo through the entire house. My husband stood there with his arms crossed, wearing that expression of patient condescension that had become his default mode when dealing with what he considered my emotional outbursts. He had clearly expected tears, pleading, maybe even anger, but what he got instead was a long moment of absolute silence as I stared at the legal documents that represented his assumption that I had no choice but to comply with his wishes. The morning light caught the expensive paper, and I found him. I fell thinking about all the other expensive things in this house that he had never questioned, never wondered how he could afford them on his salary alone. Emma had already left for school, her backpack loaded with the supplies I had bought, her lunch packed in the containers I had purchased, her field trip permission slip signed with the pen I had provided. She was wearing the clothes I had bought her, carrying the confidence I had tried to build in her despite everything working against us. My husband had kissed her goodbye absently, already focused on his day, already mentally checked out of the parenting responsibilities that fell to me by default. He never asked about her homework, never inquired about her friends, never noticed when she came home quiet and withdrawn from another family gathering where she had been made to feel invisible. The irony of his timing wasn't lost on me, because just 12 hours earlier I had been on a conference call with executives from 3 different companies, discussing a project that would generate more revenue in 6 months than he made in 2 years. The consulting contract I had just secured involved optimizing supply chain operations for a major manufacturing company, work that required expertise he couldn't even comprehend, much less provide. My business partner Jessica had been practically giddy with excitement about the scope and scale of what we were taking on, the reputation boost it would provide, the doors it would open for future opportunities. But he had no idea about any of that. because I had learned early in our marriage that sharing my successes only led to his attempts to diminish them, to find ways to make my achievements seem less significant than his modest corporate accomplishments. When I had first started my consulting business, he had been dismissive and patronizing, referring to it as my little hobby, my way of staying busy while Emma was in school. When my first major client had paid me more than his monthly salary for a week's worth of work, he had found reasons to criticize my approach, to suggest that I was probably overcharging or taking advantage of people who didn't know better. The memory of starting my business still brought a mixture of pride and pain, because it had begun during one of the lowest points in our marriage. Emma was 3 years old, and the pattern of exclusion from his family had already been established, though it was subtle enough that I was still questioning my own perceptions. I had been feeling isolated and undervalued, struggling with the constant message that my thoughts and opinions didn't matter, that my role was to support and serve rather than to contribute and lead. The business had started almost by accident, when a neighbor had asked for help organizing her small accounting practice. That first client, Mrs. Chin, had owned a family restaurant that was struggling with inventory management and customer flow optimization. She had heard through mutual friends that I had a background in business operations, and she was desperate enough to try anything to save her struggling establishment. What started as a favor for a neighbor had turned into a comprehensive overhaul of her entire operation, identifying inefficiencies that were costing her thousands of dollars monthly, implementing systems that streamlined her processes and improved her profit margins. Within 3 months, her restaurant had gone from barely surviving to consistently profitable. Word had spread quickly through the small business community about the transformation at Chin's restaurant, and suddenly I was fielding calls from other business owners who wanted similar results. Each project had been more complex than the last, each success building my reputation and expanding my network of contacts. The work was intellectually challenging in ways that my daily routine of household management and child rearing couldn't match, and I found myself energized and motivated in ways I hadn't experienced since college. But more importantly, I was good at it, really good at it, in ways that surprised even me. The business consulting work played to strengths I hadn't even known I possessed, combining analytical thinking with creative problem-solving in ways that felt natural and intuitive. I had always been the person friends came to when they needed help organizing something or figuring out a complex problem, but I had never thought of those skills as marketable or valuable in a professional context. The business world seemed to operate on different rules than the domestic world, where my contributions were taken for granted or dismissed entirely. My second major client had been a small manufacturing company that was losing money due to production inefficiencies and communication breakdowns between departments. The owner, a gruff man in his 60s who had been running the business the same way for decades, had been skeptical about hiring a consultant, especially one who looked like a suburban mom rather than a corporate expert. But his accountant had recommended me based on the results I had achieved for Mrs. Chin, and he was desperate enough to try anything. The transformation of that manufacturing company had been even more dramatic than the restaurant, involving a complete restructuring of their production workflow and implementation of communication systems that reduced errors by 70% and increased productivity by nearly 40%. The owner had been so impressed with the results that he had recommended me to 3 other businesses in his industry network, and suddenly I had more work than I could handle on my own. That was when I had brought Jessica on board as a partner, recognizing that I needed help to manage the growing demand for our services. Jessica had been working as a corporate efficiency expert for a large consulting firm, feeling frustrated and undervalued in the hierarchical corporate environment. She had been looking for an opportunity to apply her skills in a more entrepreneurial setting, and our partnership had been one of those rare professional relationships where complementary strengths created something greater than the sum of its parts. She brought corporate experience and industry connections, while I brought creative problem-solving and a fresh perspective on business optimization. Together, we had built something remarkable, a consulting firm that specialized in helping small to medium-sized businesses optimize their operations and increase profitability. Our client list had grown to include companies across multiple industries, from restaurants and retail stores to manufacturing and technology businesses. The work was varied and challenging, requiring us to quickly understand complex business operations and identify improvement opportunities that others had missed. Each successful project led to referrals and recommendations, creating a steady stream of new opportunities. The financial success had been gradual at first, then increasingly dramatic as our reputation grew and our client base expanded. What had started as supplemental income had quickly surpassed my husband's salary, then doubled it, then tripled it. The business was generating the kind of revenue that allowed for serious financial planning and investment opportunities, money that could be leveraged into long-term wealth building and security for Emma's future. But I had kept the full extent of our success hidden, partly from habit and partly from a growing awareness that knowledge was power in ways I was only beginning to understand. The real estate investments had been the next logical step, using the business income to purchase properties that would generate passive income and appreciate over time. My first investment property had been a small duplex in an up-and-coming neighborhood, purchased with cash from a particularly lucrative consulting contract. The rental income covered the property taxes and maintenance costs while providing a modest profit, but more importantly, it was the beginning of a portfolio that would eventually provide financial independence and security. The success of that first property had led to others, each purchase more strategic than the last, as I learned to analyze market trends and identify undervalued opportunities. My real estate portfolio now included 6 properties across 3 different neighborhoods, generating monthly income that exceeded most people's full-time salaries. The properties were appreciating steadily in value, creating wealth that existed entirely separate from my husband's awareness or control. Each mortgage payment and property improvement was building equity that belonged solely to me, assets that could provide for Emma's education and our future independence. The investment accounts had been the most sophisticated part of my financial strategy, working with a financial advisor who specialized in helping business owners optimize their tax strategies and build long-term wealth. My portfolio was diversified across multiple asset classes, from traditional stocks and bonds to more aggressive growth investments that had performed exceptionally well over the past few years. The quarterly statement showed returns that validated every risk I had taken, every late night I had spent researching companies and analyzing market trends. But beyond the financial success, the business had given me something even more valuable, a sense of my own worth and capability that couldn't be diminished by my husband's dismissal or his family's rejection. In the business world, I was respected for my expertise, sought after for my insights, and valued for my ability to solve complex problems that others couldn't handle. Corporate executives who manage budgets in the millions would call me for advice, would implement my recommendations, would pay premium rates for access to my strategic thinking. The contrast between my professional life and my personal life had become increasingly stark over the years. During S hours, I was commanding conference rooms, presenting solutions to boards of directors, negotiating contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I was making decisions that affected multiple companies and dozens of employees, solving problems that had stumped others, creating value that could be measured in concrete financial terms. Then I would come home to a family that treated me like an afterthought, where my opinions were dismissed and my contributions were taken for granted. The documentation of Emma's systematic exclusion had become part of my preparation for this moment, a careful record of the pattern of favoritism and rejection that had characterized her treatment by my husband's family. I had photographs from family gatherings showing the disparity in gift distribution, saved text messages revealing the planning that went into excluding Emma from special events, recorded conversations where family members discussed her as if she were somehow less deserving than her cousins. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, a clear picture of emotional abuse disguised as family tradition. My attorney had been thorough in explaining the legal implications of the evidence I had gathered, the ways it could be used to protect Emma's interests and ensure her well-being in any custody arrangement. The financial documentation was equally important, demonstrating not just my ability to provide for Emma, but also the deliberate way I had structured my assets to protect her future. Every investment decision, every business move, every financial strategy had been made with Emma's security and independence in mind. The trust fund I had established for Emma was structured to provide for her education, her health needs, and her future opportunities in ways that couldn't be touched by anyone else's financial decisions or family dynamics. The scholarship fund I had created would eventually help other children in similar situations, providing resources and support for kids who found themselves undervalued or excluded by the adults who should have been protecting them. The business partnership agreement Jessica and I had signed ensured that my share of the company would transfer to Emma if anything happened to me, providing her with ongoing income and financial security. But perhaps most importantly, I had been building Emma's own sense of worth and capability, even as his family worked to undermine it. The private tutoring I had arranged for her advanced mathematical abilities, the music lessons that nurtured her creative talents, the confidence-building activities that helped her recognize her own value, all of it was designed to ensure that she would never accept less than she deserved. I was raising a daughter who would know her worth and demand recognition for her contributions, who would never allow herself to be diminished or dismissed the way I had been. The morning phone calls that had preceded my husband's dramatic announcement had been particularly significant because they represented the culmination of months of strategic planning and preparation. My business partner had called to confirm the details of our largest contract to date, a comprehensive optimization project for a regional hospital system that would showcase our capabilities on a massive scale. The project would require us to analyze and improve operations across multiple facilities, affecting thousands of employees and tens of thousands of patients, work that would establish us as leaders in healthcare consulting. My real estate agent had called with news about a commercial property opportunity that would allow me to expand my portfolio into more lucrative investment categories. The property was a small office building in a rapidly developing area, currently undervalued, but positioned for significant appreciation as the neighborhood continued to improve. The purchase would require a substantial cash investment, but the projected returns made it an opportunity too good to pass up. More importantly, it represented the kind of sophisticated investment strategy that demonstrated just how far my financial acumen had evolved. My financial advisor had led with quarterly portfolio updates that exceeded even our optimistic projections, confirming that the investment strategies we had implemented were producing exceptional results. The growth in my asset base was accelerating, creating wealth at a pace that would ensure Emma's future security and my own independence. The numbers represented not just financial success, but also validation of every decision I had made to protect and build our future while enduring the dismissal and disrespect of people who had no idea what I was capable of achieving. The accountant's call had been about tax strategies for the coming year, ways to optimize my business structure and investment approaches to minimize tax liability while maximizing growth potential. The conversation had involved concepts and strategies that most people never encounter, sophisticated financial planning that required expertise and experience to implement effectively. The fact that I was able to understand and make informed decisions about such complex matters was a source of quiet pride, evidence of how much I had learned and grown since starting my business journey. And then, in the middle of this whirlwind of professional success and financial achievement, my husband had walked into the kitchen and placed those divorce papers on the counter, completely oblivious to the irony of his timing. He had chosen that moment to assert his power and control, to demonstrate his assumption that I had no options and no resources, to prove that he held all the cards in our relationship. He had no idea that I had been building toward this moment for years, that every business success and financial milestone had been a step toward independence and security for Emma and myself. The look of confident expectation on his face as he waited for my response revealed everything about how he saw our relationship and my place within it. He expected gratitude for the years of marriage, compliance with his decision-making, acceptance of whatever terms he chose to offer. He expected me to be grateful that he was handling the divorce proceedings, relieved that he was taking care of the complicated details, appreciative that he wasn't asking for more than he thought I could reasonably provide. He had no concept of the reality that surrounded us, no awareness of the financial foundation that supported our lifestyle, no understanding of the strategic planning that had been happening right under his nose. The silence stretched between us as I stared at the divorce papers, thinking about all the conversations we had never had, all the assumptions he had made, all the opportunities he had missed to see who I really was and what I had accomplished. The papers represented his final attempt to control the narrative of our relationship, to position himself as the reasonable party, making a generous offer to the dependent wife who should be grateful for his consideration. But they also represented my opportunity to reveal the truth, to demonstrate the reality of our situation, to show him and his family exactly who they had been dismissing and undervaluing all these years. My phone buzzed again with another business call, another opportunity, another reminder of the life I had built parallel to the one he thought he controlled. This time it was a potential client, a technology startup that needed help scaling their operations as they prepared for rapid growth. The kind of high-level consulting work that commanded premium fees and created industry recognition, the kind of project that would further establish my reputation as an expert in organizational optimization. I let the call go to voicemail, knowing that I would return it later, after I had dealt with the immediate situation in my kitchen. The irony was almost overwhelming as I stood there looking at legal documents designed to divide assets that he didn't even know existed, to establish custody arrangements for a child whose true potential he had never recognized, to end a marriage where he had never understood who he had actually married. The divorce papers represented his perception of our life together, a narrative where he was the provider and I was the dependent, where he held the power and I held the gratitude, where he made the decisions and I accepted the consequences. But the reality was so different from his perception that I almost felt sorry for him, almost pitied the limitations of his imagination and the narrowness of his worldview. He was about to discover that the quiet woman he had dismissed and taken for granted had built something extraordinary while he wasn't paying attention, had created options and opportunities that existed far beyond his ability to control or limit. The divorce he thought he was initiating was about to become something entirely different than what he had planned, a revelation that would change not just our family dynamic but his understanding of who had actually been in control all along. I picked up the divorce papers and read through them slowly, deliberately, while my husband shifted impatiently beside me, clearly expecting immediate compliance or emotional breakdown. The terms he had outlined were generous in his mind, offering me a modest settlement and shared custody that would maintain his family's access to Emma while limiting my ability to relocate or make major decisions about her future. He had assumed I would be grateful for his fairness, relieved that he wasn't asking for spousal support, appreciative that he was allowing me to keep some of the household items I had grown attached to over the years. The condescension was breathtaking in its completeness, the assumption that I had no choice but to accept whatever he offered. When I finally looked up from the papers, I saw something flicker across his face, a moment of uncertainty as he registered that my reaction wasn't matching his expectations. I wasn't crying, wasn't angry, wasn't pleading for reconciliation or more favorable terms. Instead, I was calm, thoughtful, almost analytical in my approach to what he had clearly intended as an emotional ambush. I set the papers down carefully on the counter, walked to my home office, and returned with a manila folder that contained documents he had never seen, papers that would reframe everything he thought he knew about our marriage and our future. The first document I placed on the counter was a business financial statement showing the revenue and profit margins of the consulting firm I had built with Jessica. The numbers were substantial enough to make him blink twice, income figures that dwarfed his corporate salary and benefits package. His eyes moved across the page slowly, processing information that didn't fit with his understanding of our family's financial situation. I watched him try to reconcile these numbers with his assumption that we lived primarily on his income, that I contributed only modest supplemental earnings from my little hobby business. The second document was a real estate portfolio summary showing the 6 properties I owned, their current market values, and the monthly rental income they generated. The numbers represented more wealth than he had accumulated in his entire career, assets that had been acquired and managed while he was focused on his corporate advancement and family politics. His face went through a series of expressions as he processed the implications, realizing that the woman he had been preparing to divorce owned more property than he had ever imagined, generated more passive income than his active employment provided. The third document was an investment account statement showing a portfolio value that represented true financial independence, numbers that meant Emma and I could maintain our current lifestyle indefinitely without any contribution from him or his family. The diversification was sophisticated, the returns impressive, the growth trajectory pointing toward even greater wealth accumulation in the future. I watched him struggle to understand how I had acquired such substantial assets while maintaining the appearance of someone who depended on his financial support and decision-making. But the document that really shattered his composure was the property deed for our house, clearly showing that the mortgage was in my name alone, that the down payment had come from my business account, that the monthly payments were being made from my real estate investment income. The house he had been living in as the head of household, the home where he had hosted his family's gatherings and established his authority, belonged entirely to me. He had been a guest in his own life, supported by income he hadn't earned, housed in property he didn't own. The silence that followed was profound, filled with the sound of assumptions crumbling and perceptions realigning. He looked from the documents to me and back again, as if trying to solve a puzzle that had too many pieces and no clear picture on the box. The confident man who had placed divorce papers on the counter 20 minutes earlier was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to understand that he had fundamentally misunderstood the power dynamics of our relationship. The generous terms he had offered suddenly looked like what they actually were: a man with limited assets trying to divide wealth that didn't belong to him. His first question was predictable, a stammered inquiry about how long I had been hiding this from him, as if my business success was some kind of deception rather than an achievement he had simply ignored. I explained calmly that I had never hidden anything, that I had tried to share my successes with him early in our marriage only to have them dismissed and minimized. I reminded him of the conversations where I had mentioned major contracts and significant payments, only to have him change the subject or suggest that I was probably exaggerating the importance of my work. The progression of his understanding was almost painful to watch, as he began to realize that every dismissive comment, every patronizing explanation, every assumption about my capabilities had been not just wrong but spectacularly wrong. The woman he had been treating like a dependent had been supporting the lifestyle he enjoyed, funding the gatherings where his family excluded our daughter, paying for the very platform they used to demonstrate their perceived superiority. The irony was so complete that it bordered on the absurd. What seemed to disturb him most was the realization that his family's treatment of Emma had been subsidized by my success, that their elaborate gift-giving displays and special celebrations had been funded by income from the woman they dismissed as unworthy of their respect. Every family dinner where they had treated me like a charity case had been paid for with my money. Every vacation where they had flaunted their prosperity had been made possible by my business achievements. Every gathering where Emma had been excluded and devalued had been hosted using resources I had provided. The phone rang in the middle of his processing, and I answered it calmly, conducting a brief but professional conversation with a potential client who wanted to schedule a consultation about a major operational restructuring project. The contrast between my confident professional demeanor and the submissive wife he thought he knew seemed to destabilize him further. He listened to me discuss complex business concepts with authority and expertise, heard me quote fees that exceeded his monthly salary, watched me schedule meetings with executives he could only dream of accessing. When I hung up the phone, he was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time, as if the woman standing in the kitchen was a complete stranger who had somehow replaced the person he thought he had married. The cognitive dissonance was written across his face, the struggle to reconcile his perception of our relationship with the evidence spread across the counter. He asked how long I had been planning this, how long I had been preparing to leave him, and I realized he still didn't understand that this wasn't about planning to leave him, but about building a life worth protecting. I explained that everything I had built was about ensuring Emma's security and providing her with opportunities that couldn't be taken away by other people's judgments or limitations. The business success, the real estate investments, the financial planning, all of it was designed to give my daughter choices and protection that would serve her throughout her life. I had been building her inheritance while his family had been teaching her to accept less than she deserved, creating her foundation while they were undermining her confidence. The documentation I had gathered about Emma's treatment wasn't revenge, I explained, but protection, evidence that would ensure any custody arrangement prioritized her emotional well-being over his family's convenience. The photographs, messages, and recorded conversations told a clear story of systematic exclusion and emotional neglect that no family court would ignore. Emma's future would be determined by what was best for her development and happiness, not by what was most comfortable for adults who had failed to value her appropriately. His attempt to negotiate, to suggest that we could work things out now that he understood the real situation, revealed that he still didn't grasp the fundamental issue. This wasn't about money or assets, or even his family's behavior, though all of those things mattered. This was about Emma learning what she deserved, about teaching her that she didn't have to accept dismissal or exclusion, about showing her that her worth wasn't determined by other people's limitations or prejudices. The divorce wasn't punishment for past behavior, but protection for future growth. The conversation was interrupted by Emma's return from school, her backpack dragging behind her as she walked through the door with the careful neutrality she had learned to maintain around family tension. But something was different about her today, a brightness in her eyes that I hadn't seen in months. She had received recognition for a science project at school, had been selected to participate in an advanced mathematics program, had been invited to join the academic team for her grade level. The contrast between her excitement about these achievements and her resignation about family gatherings was heartbreaking and illuminating. My husband's interaction with Emma in that moment revealed everything about the distance that had grown between them, the way he struggled to engage with her accomplishments because he had never learned to see her clearly. He offered the kind of generic praise that adults give children when they aren't really listening, the distracted congratulations that communicate polite interest rather than genuine pride. Emma accepted his response with the same careful neutrality she showed at family gatherings, protecting herself from disappointment by expecting less. But when she showed me her science project and described her selection for the mathematics program, her entire demeanor changed. She became animated and confident, explaining complex concepts with enthusiasm and precision, demonstrating the intellectual capabilities that his family had trained her to hide. Watching her transform from careful neutrality to genuine excitement reinforced my determination to ensure she never had to diminish herself for other people's comfort again. The evening brought phone calls from his family, summoned by his confused and panicked explanations of the afternoon's revelations. His mother's call was particularly illuminating. Her attempt to salvage the family dynamic by offering belated recognition of my contributions and suggesting that we could all start fresh with better understanding and appreciation. The transparency of her panic was almost amusing, the sudden acknowledgement of my worth now that the financial implications were clear. Sarah's call was more direct, asking pointed questions about the family gatherings and gift distributions, suddenly concerned about perceptions and fairness that hadn't troubled her when she thought I had no power to address them. Her tone had shifted from condescending superiority to nervous conciliation, offering explanations and justifications for behavior that needed no interpretation. The systematic exclusion of Emma hadn't been oversight or tradition. It had been deliberate messaging about worth and value. And now that the message had backfired, she wanted to rewrite the history. But the most revealing conversation was with Emma herself. After the phone calls had ended and my husband had retreated to his study to process the complete upheaval of his understanding, I found her in her room, working on homework that was several grade levels above her assigned work, pursuing intellectual challenges that satisfied her curiosity and stretched her capabilities. When I asked her about her feelings regarding the family situation, her response was both mature and heartbreaking. She told me that she had known for a long time that she wasn't as important to Daddy's family as her cousins were, that she had figured out the patterns and learned to protect herself from expecting equal treatment. She had developed strategies for managing disappointment, techniques for finding satisfaction in her own achievements rather than seeking validation from adults who wouldn't provide it. But what broke my heart was her assumption that this was normal, that some children were simply worth more than others, that her job was to accept her position rather than demand better treatment. Our conversation that night was about worth and value, about the difference between what other people thought of her and what she was actually capable of achieving. I showed her the trust fund documents that would provide for her education and future opportunities, explained the scholarship fund that would help other children in similar situations, described the business legacy that would give her both financial security and professional options. But more importantly, I told her that she would never again have to accept less than she deserved, never have to shrink herself to fit other people's limitations. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive, managed by attorneys who specialized in protecting the interests of high-net-worth individuals and their children. The custody arrangement that emerged prioritized Emma's emotional well-being and educational opportunities, limiting exposure to family dynamics that had proven harmful to her development. The financial settlement reflected the reality of our asset distribution rather than my husband's assumptions about dependency and gratitude. But the most significant change was in Emma herself, the gradual emergence of confidence and self-advocacy that came from knowing she was valued and protected. She began to excel academically in ways that drew attention from teachers and administrators, participated in enrichment programs that challenged her intellectually, developed friendships with children who appreciated her intelligence rather than expecting her to hide it. The transformation was gradual but profound, the blossoming of a child who no longer had to manage other people's insecurities and limitations. The business continued to grow and evolve, with Jessica and I taking on increasingly complex and lucrative projects that established our reputation as leaders in organizational optimization. The success provided not just financial security but professional satisfaction, the knowledge that our expertise was valued and sought after by organizations that appreciated sophisticated problem-solving and strategic thinking. Emma often visited the office after school, observing the professional environment where her mother was respected and influential. The real estate portfolio expanded strategically, with acquisitions that positioned us for long-term wealth building and provided Emma with assets that would appreciate throughout her lifetime. The investment strategies became more sophisticated as our asset base grew, working with financial advisors who specialized in multi-generational wealth planning and tax optimization. Every financial decision was made with Emma's future in mind, building a foundation that would provide her with choices and opportunities regardless of what life brought. My former husband's adjustment to the new reality was difficult and prolonged, complicated by his family's struggle to accept their loss of control and influence. The financial dependence they hadn't realized existed became obvious as their lifestyle contracted to match their actual earning capacity. The family gatherings became smaller and less elaborate, the gift-giving more modest, the displays of superiority more difficult to maintain without the subsidization they hadn't known they were receiving. But perhaps the most significant change was in the family's treatment of Emma during the limited time she spent with them. The obvious shift in power dynamics had created a new awareness of consequences, a recognition that dismissive behavior toward her would result in reduced access and influence. The careful documentation of past treatment served as an effective deterrent to future exclusion, creating accountability where none had existed before. Emma's relationship with her father evolved slowly, hindered by years of emotional distance and his difficulty connecting with her intellectual capabilities and academic achievements. The supervised visits were structured to prioritize her comfort and interest, with activities chosen to engage her curiosity rather than simply fill time. The improvement was gradual but measurable, with Emma learning to advocate for herself and communicate her needs rather than simply accepting whatever attention was offered. The new house I purchased was chosen specifically for Emma's happiness and development, with space for her academic pursuits, proximity to educational opportunities, and an environment that encouraged her growth rather than limiting it. She had input in every decision, from the neighborhood selection to the room design, learning that her preferences and comfort mattered in ways they never had before. The house became a symbol of our independence and our commitment to prioritizing what was truly important. The scholarship fund IES established grew into something larger than I had initially planned, providing resources for children who found themselves undervalued or excluded by the adults who should have been protecting them. Working with educators and child advocates, we developed programs that identified and supported academia. Callie gifted children from difficult family situations, providing them with enrichment opportunities and emotional support that helped them thrive despite challenging circumstances. Emma's involvement in the scholarship selection process became one of her favorite activities, giving her the opportunity to mentor younger children and share her experience of overcoming family dismissal and exclusion. Her natural empathy and intelligence made her an effective advocate for other children, and her personal story provided hope and inspiration for kids who were struggling with similar family dynamics. The annual scholarship ceremony became a highlight of our year, celebrating the achievements of children who had overcome significant obstacles to pursue their educational goals. Emma would often speak at these events, sharing her journey from accepting less to demanding better, encouraging other children to recognize their worth and pursue their dreams regardless of what others might say about their capabilities or potential. Years later, as I watched Emma graduate from high school as valedictorian, accepted to multiple prestigious universities with full scholarships based on her academic achievements, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to that moment. The quiet woman who had once accepted dismissal and exclusion had become someone who commanded respect and built opportunities. The uncertain child who had learned to expect less had become a confident young woman who knew her worth and demanded recognition for her contributions. The business had evolved into a respected consulting firm with national clients and industry recognition, providing financial security that extended far beyond our immediate needs. The real estate investments had appreciated significantly, creating wealth that would support multiple generations. The scholarship fund had helped dozens of children access educational opportunities that transformed their life trajectories. But most importantly, Emma had grown into someone who would never accept less than she deserved, who would build rather than diminish, who would create rather than simply endure. Standing in the graduation ceremony audience, watching my daughter receive recognition for her academic excellence and community service, I thought about the family gathering where this journey had really begun, where Emma had sat quietly watching her cousins receive gifts while learning to expect nothing. The contrast was profound and satisfying, not because of any revenge against those who had dismissed us, but because of what we had built together in the space beyond their limitations. The woman who had once signed divorce papers while revealing hidden assets had become someone who created opportunities for others, who used success as a platform for helping rather than simply accumulating. Emma had learned that worth wasn't determined by other people's recognition but by personal achievement and contribution, that dignity came from building something meaningful rather than simply demanding acknowledgement. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is showing them they deserve better, teaching them to recognize their worth, and providing them with the tools to build the life they want rather than accepting the life others think they should have. What would you have done in my situation? And what are you teaching the children in your life about their own value and potential?